Right. Well, all right. Well, good morning. Um, I'm Angie Dorsch. I'm the Executive Director of Equal Justice Wyoming. We still have some people joining, so hopefully we'll be able to let everyone into the meeting. But again, I'm Angie Dorsch. I'm the Executive Director of Equal Justice Wyoming, and I just want to thank everyone who's joining us today for this needs assessment presentation. The needs assessment has been a huge undertaking, and we're just very happy to share the results. First, I'd like to thank the organizations that sponsored the needs assessment, which was Legal Aid of Wyoming, the Equal Justice Wyoming Foundation, and Equal Justice Wyoming. And we also had a lot of support from the Access to Justice Commission as well. I also want to thank all of the legal aid providers that provided information, data, and feedback for the needs assessment. All of our legal aid providers in the state participated, including the Wyoming Children's Law Center, the Coalition Against Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault, the Teton County Access to Justice Center, HealthWorks Medical Legal Partnership, and the legal clinics at the University of Wyoming College of Law. So a big thanks to everyone who helped with this needs assessment. This was just a very big year-long undertaking, and a lot of work went into this. So I want to thank those who were involved in all of the planning meetings and really the work that went into it. So a big thank you to Ray Machia, the Director of Legal Aid of Wyoming, to Walter Eggers, who's a board member on Equal Justice Wyoming, the Equal Justice Wyoming Foundation, and is also a commission member for the Access to Justice Commission. Also a big thank you to Kevin Murphy, who was Equal Justice Wyoming's AmeriCorps Vista member who worked on this project. And then, of course, the team at DataCorp who did the bulk of the work for the needs assessment. So just really appreciate all the hard work that went into this. We have a lot to get through, so at this time, I'd just like to go ahead and turn it over to Allison Minu of DataCorp. We've worked very closely with Allison and her team over the past year, and so I just want to say a big thank you to Allison and everybody at DataCorp for the really wonderful job they did on this needs assessment. So Allison, at this time, I'll just go ahead and let you get started.
Great, thank you, Angie. Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you all for taking the time to come to our presentation of the Wyoming Civil Legal Needs Assessment. As Angie mentioned, it was a big undertaking, and I also want to thank all of the sponsors and partners who helped us with it. We met monthly throughout the project, and there was so much provided to us, especially with the Vista volunteer, Kevin Murphy, that Angie mentioned. He really helped us out a lot and was just like part of our team. So this needs assessment was a comprehensive study that included several components and methods, and we couch it under the term of a mixed methods approach, which includes the use of two major types of data: quantitative data on one side, which I was primarily responsible for, and qualitative data on the other side, which Susan Janke, my colleague, was responsible for. So on the quantitative side, we had several different types of measures that we used. We had social indicators, and I'll be showing you some of those today, which is basically data that's collected in archives or available through the US Census that's normally collected for another purpose, but is really valuable to things like needs assessments and evaluations. And then we had two surveys that we did. One was a client survey where we asked clients about experiences they may have had in the past year that could turn into legal issues, civil legal issues. And then we had a professional survey where we asked questions of people in the legal profession and others who work with economically disadvantaged populations about types of legal issues they may have provided services for in the last year, or clients that they worked with who had those problems. And then we also used the case management data that came from Legal Aid of Wyoming, Equal Justice Wyoming, the Coalition Against Domestic Violence, the Children's Law Center, the Medical Legal Partnership, and Teton Access to Justice. And then we also had data provided to us from the Wyoming Free Legal Answers and the Volunteer Reference Attorney. On the qualitative side, Susan conducted 5 focus groups around the state with professionals in the legal profession and related areas who work with the client population. She conducted 6 client stakeholder interviews, 20 professional interviews, and then there was an environmental scan, which is basically us keeping our eyes and ears open to things in the news or other meetings that we might go into in the state, other needs assessments that have been done where you get information that's very, very current. So for instance, in our case, you're going to hear a lot about COVID because a lot of things came up with COVID over the course of the needs assessment. And before I get off this slide, I also want to take a moment to thank everyone who participated in our interviews and helped us collect survey data and participated in our focus groups, because it really was a joint effort statewide, and it really made the project all it could be. And I appreciate all the help everyone gave. Okay, so I had mentioned those social indicators. That's what I'm going to talk about first. And we really use these to understand the extent of poverty in the state and the client population. So most of these speak to characteristics of the client population and how that's dispersed in the state. So the first one I have here is a graph that shows the extent of poverty in Wyoming. And I have it here showing it for all ages and then over 18, since it's likely to be an adult that would be seeking services. And so this one has it in rank order. And when you see a copy of the report, we've presented it in a few different ways, geographically and also a table of numbers. So here we see that Albany and Fremont County are on the top. So if you look at the lighter colored line, it shows the level in Albany County is 21.8%, and then the low would be in Teton County at 6.2%. And so going on with those social indicators, another really good indicator that describes an economically disadvantaged population is what it takes for them to pay for their housing. And so on the left side here, we have a graph that shows home ownership, and on the right, rentals. And this particular indicator depicts severely cost-burdened households. So that in the severely cost-burdened case, it means that it takes 50% of their income or more to pay for their rent or their mortgage payment. And then they also have it for just cost burden, which is around 30 or 35%. But I chose to use the severe to minimize the number of maps and to get at that real economically disadvantaged population. So what you see on the left here is the dark purple, Teton County and Johnson County. They're coming in at about 9.5% of the people that live in those counties would be considered severely cost burdened on what it costs for them to pay for their homes. And then for rentals, the dark purple there is at 22.68%, and you see that for Albany and Niobrara counties. So moving on, another area, and as I said, there were several components to the study, so I'm going to mention places where we had lots of overlap between the different components, or among them rather. And this is one area where debt collections and the housing. In this needs assessment, almost no matter what method we were looking at data, there was convergence across them. So whether it was the survey data, the social indicators, or any of it, it was very validating to see it all go together so nicely. So here on the left, we have a depiction of medical debt collection at the county level. And the darkest blue color would be people who have medical debt collections in the amount of $1,156 or more. And then the lowest amount was $567. That's the lightest blue. And the gray is where there were no data or the data were suppressed. And so data are often suppressed when there's too few cases to get a reasonable estimate, especially when it's something like this coming from census data. And this was prepared by the Urban Institute. And this data is current as of 2019. On the non-medical side, the dark purple represents people who have debt collections in the amount of 1,600 or more. And then again, the lightest shade is the lower amount, 1,201 or less. And then the gray is where there were no data available. So this one, and this is a perennial problem. We hear it in just about every needs assessment we do or other needs assessments that we look at, focus groups. It doesn't matter if it was for this project or if it's for a mental health project, transportation is a perennial problem. And so what this map is showing you is across the state, households that don't have vehicles. And so this brightest color here, which is Johnson County again, there's 8% or more households without a vehicle. And we heard this a lot. Particularly, actually, it was in one of the focus groups. Someone said that there was actually a person, well, this wasn't because they didn't have a car. It was because they didn't have $10 to pay for gas in their car, that they weren't able to make it to a court of parents and ended up being put in jail as a result. So what we find when we hear about this transportation issue is that it's a huge barrier to people being able to get employment and to even be able to access services of any kind. So another big area, and this is another piece on the environmental scan that you've probably heard about since COVID, is food insecurity. And in this case, there's an organization called Feeding America, and every year they do updates that show how many people are food insecure. They do it at the county level for the entire nation. And so in Wyoming, by their calculations, there's 70,640 food insecure people in the state. And this data was also updated while we were working on the project. And then when I went to double check at the very end of finishing up the report, I found that they had actually done a special report with 2020 projections of food insecurity due to COVID. And so the map that you see on the right is from that updated projection study that they did. And so in Wyoming, Crook County has the lowest, but it's at 15.3%, and Fremont County had the highest percentage of food insecure residents, and that's at 20.3%. So those are the, that's Crook up there, and then there's Fremont there. And then I just want to say a word about this so that there's no confusion. The bar on the bottom shows a range from 8.6 up to 34.2. It's so small, I can barely see it. And that's what it is for the entire country. So for Wyoming, we're kind of falling in, you know, right around on the low end, higher than the nation, which is good, and lower than the worst, which is also good. But it has gone up compared to what the estimates were for previous years as a result of COVID. Okay, so the survey data. So I mentioned we had done 2 surveys, the client survey or potential clients and a survey of professionals. And so I have here on the left some data from the client surveys and some data from the professional surveys for comparison purpose. But first, just a few facts about it. We had 99 respondents on the client survey. This one was a little bit challenging. Our response rate ended up being 37%, which is acceptable. It would have been nice if it was higher, but it's still an acceptable rate. And it was done over the fall and the winter. So because we weren't quite getting what we needed, we extended that survey for a little while longer. And on the professional side, we had 148 respondents, so that was fantastic. and it turned out to be 46.3%. And that survey was conducted in the fall. So what I've put up here was basically how things shook out. So the survey had questions at this high level, questions about family legal issues. These are the high level categories. And then in the next few slides that I'll be showing you, we'll be drilling down to look at the details in there. But basically, when you look at this, you can see that both clients and professionals reported legal issues around family legal matters most frequently. On the client side, that was followed by medical debt, housing, other financial debt, and then some discrimination issues that we'll dive into. And then on the professional side, the family issues were followed by other financial debt, housing again, some issues surrounding non-criminal police involvement, employment, and medical debt. Okay. So demographic-wise, when we look at the age groups, we see that all of the age groups on the client survey were represented. We had the most were in the age group from 45 to 64 years old, and that came in at 34%. And then this was followed by 25 to 34-year-olds, which came in at 24%. It was primarily women who took the client survey. We had 74% women and 24% men, 26% men. So on race and ethnicity, it was 83% Caucasian, 9% Hispanic, 3% African American, 2% Hawaiian Pacific Islanders, 2% Native Americans, and 2% Asian. And then on education, we had 5% with less than a high school degree. 46% was the most frequent category was a high school degree or GED. Some college at 29%, and then the rest were those with college degrees. And then employment status. So this data, it came from last fall, so it's pre-COVID, so it's probably going to look a little bit different now, as you can well imagine. Again, all the things that you've heard in the news and probably have even seen. And so at the time, though, we had 49% reported that they were employed full-time and 22% reported they were enrolled part-time, and those were the two greatest categories. And so I'm just going to say a word about this. We actually have quite a bit of employment data in the report, and the Wyoming Department of Labor had actually updated it a few times, so we were able to get it as current as June for what's in the report. So there's a little bit that reflects the impact of COVID on employment statistics. So diving a little bit deeper into those broad categories that the survey asked about. So it asked the big question about had they had any of these experiences. This would be in legal family issues, and then they were able to check off anything that applied to them. So you see that 26% said that they had experienced domestic violence, stalking, or sexual assault in the last year on the client survey. 13% reported that they had experienced divorce or a separation involving children. Another 13% reported custody or visitation issues. 11% reported child support payment collection issues. And then 7% reported divorce or a separation that did not involve children. And then this was followed by open cases with Child Protective Services and difficulty with child support orders coming in at 6%. And then the rest are pretty small, so I won't go over every single one of them. But again, all of this is in the report, and you can look at it in great detail if you like. Okay, so the second one on the client side was the medical debt. And the primary issue that clients reported was having received medical services that weren't covered by health insurance, and that came in at 26%. The next one after that was individuals who felt they had been billed incorrectly for medical services, and that came in at 18%. Being denied Medicaid benefits also came in at 18%. And having problems with medical debt collectors came in at 14%, and then that's followed by problems with government insurance at 10%, and so on. On the housing side, the clients reported 18% that they had either been evicted or threatened with eviction, that they had had their utilities shut off, that came in at 10%. Actually, we had several come in at 10%. That they had had housing problems due to experiencing domestic violence, sexual assault, or stalking. They'd had subsidized housing issues, or they had been treated poorly exercising tenant rights. So again, this is another one of those areas where the data really can converge, because in the stakeholder interviews, we heard quite a bit about individuals and some of the housing experiences they were having, being afraid to, the next category is poor housing quality and being refused repairs. So a lot of people felt they couldn't ask for repairs to improve the quality of their housing. And they also told us in the stakeholder interviews that if they were afraid they wouldn't get their deposits back if they wanted to move. That was highly problematic for an economically disadvantaged person that would rely on that deposit to be able to get another place to live. So on the non-medical debt reported by the clients, the number one area at 19% was threats from bill collectors. 14% reported having their wages garnished. 11% reported having credit problems due to identity theft. Another 9% reported that they had experienced a scam that resulted in debt. Another 9% reported that they had filed for or needed to file for bankruptcy. And then there were 7% who reported issues with payday loans. And then the other smaller percentages, again, I won't go over each one of them. So the discrimination was interesting. So there were two types of questions. The first question asked about discrimination that's against them as a person or a human being. And in this case, 69% had not experienced it, but 31% had. And the number one reason that people had been discriminated against, as reported in this questionnaire item, was for their status as a victim of domestic violence or sexual assault. Another 5% reported they had been discriminated against because of their credit history. 3% reported they'd been discriminated against because of their gender. Another 3% reported they had been discriminated against because they had children living in their household. Another 3% reported being discriminated against because of their sexual orientation. And 2% reported being discriminated against because of their age, and 2% reported being discriminated against because of a disability or the use of a service animal. And then at 1%, those are followed by discrimination due to race or ethnicity, religion, marital status, homelessness, and immigration status. The other discrimination question asked about instances where they may have been discriminated against when they were trying to seek services. And so 65% had not experienced it, but of the 35% who had, 8% reported it when trying to secure rental housing, 5% in employment, 5% reported experiencing discrimination when shopping or going into stores and restaurants, 4% reported discrimination trying to get credit and working with banks. 4% reported discrimination in the healthcare industry. In home ownership, that came in at 3%.
Okay.
Mobile home and manufactured housing.
I was thinking, let me just check my schedule real fast. I was thinking like right around lunchtime.
And 3% reported it in law enforcement. And then there were 1% for education and government assistance. Okay, so moving on. So we also asked the clients about how they tried to access services. And in this case, 34% hadn't, but all the rest had. And so when they tried to get legal help, they went to 21% reported seeking help from legal aid services, 14% through volunteer attorneys, 10% through other nonprofit organizations, 9% through private attorneys, and then 4% through social services, this other category, we don't know what that is, and then 2% through a notary public or disability services at 1%. We also asked when they did try to access help, what kind of help they received. So 20% reported that they had gotten legal advice, 14% reported they received assistance with the forms. And I just want to take a minute to say that you're going to hear a lot about the forms, especially in the report and in some of the other slides later on. People have a big struggle with those, which I'm going to guess a lot of you already know that. And then 13% reported that they had a lawyer represent them. 10% were referred to a hotline, and 8% had a lawyer negotiate on their behalf, and 3% received some other kind of legal help, or other help, I should say. And then on the clients, we also asked about barriers to accessing services, because in a needs assessment, you want to know when people do try to reach out and get help, why they may not be able to get it or what happened. And so in this case, and this one kind of goes right along with the forms, these were the two big things that came out, was that 36% reported they have trouble understanding court rules and procedures. 29% reported that they had been denied an attorney. 21% reported being denied a waiver of court fees and charges. 7% reported not being provided an interpreter to help them communicate in court. Another 7% reported that they had some kind of a family or work obligation that prevented them from getting to court. So these were the primary reasons why people were not able to access services. So now we're going to look on the professional side and dig a little bit deeper into what everyone who did that survey told us. So just to go over who our respondents were first, 22% were private attorneys, 20% were court clerks. We had 16% librarians, and you're going to hear a lot about librarians in the report and a little bit later on. There 14% were judges, 18% were human service providers who serve the target population in their work. 7% were from other categories. And 7% were staff at public interest law organizations, other 5% from other low income service providers, 1% pro bono attorney, and 1% community advocates. Okay, so again, that family law, which probably doesn't come as a surprise to any of you, was the #1 category reported by professionals for services they had provided. And so that top response there was that they provided services for divorce or separations involving children. And this was followed by providing services around domestic violence, stalking, or sexual assault. These were also the top 2 on the client questionnaire, and I've looked at this so many times I remember, but I'll just point out these 2 were switched on the client questionnaire, but it's the same top. In fact, all of them are basically the same, the top answers, but I thought it was noteworthy that these were switched. And then an open case with Child Protective Services, 9%, custody or visitation cases, 8%, child support payment collection, 8%, divorce or separation that did not involve children, 7%, difficulty paying child support, 7%, difficulty with child support order, 6%, and so on. So there were quite a few here. On the financial debt, wage garnishment came out on the top in the professional survey. And then needing to file for bankruptcy was 15%. Problems paying fines and judgments was next at 11%. Threats for bill collectors, 10%. Experiencing the scam, 9%. And the payday loans pop up here again. and then repossession or payment on vehicles came in next. So again, there's great concordance between this professional survey and the client survey, and we really like to see that in these types of studies. On the housing, this was a little bit different. The #1 housing type cases that involved homelessness for 15% of the professionals who reported. And then being threatened with eviction or being evicted, 14%. Having problems with landlords. So again, this just kept popping up, and it came up in the interviews, as I mentioned before, 12%. The domestic violence and sexual assault affecting housing, 11%. Not being able to afford rent increases, 9%, and having subsidized housing issues at 7%. And then here's that business about the deposits being withheld. 6% of the professionals reported helping people with those problems. Okay, so the criminal justice related services, the #1 reported type of case here was expungements or needing to remove something from a criminal record. And that was 42%. So that was really the bulk of them. The next one was that people reported working with clients who'd been afraid to call the police after experiencing a crime. And all of this is actually pretty timely now too. Being stopped by the police without a good reason or being unfairly arrested, 17%. Not having enough police in a neighborhood or police not responding quickly to a 911 call or not taking problems that are reported seriously was 10% of the professionals responded on that one. And then verbally or physically threatened, treated roughly, or assaulted by the police, 7% of the professionals reported that they had worked with a client who had that experience in the last year. So at the end of the survey, we had 2 open-ended questions, and we asked them if there was anything else that they thought would be important for us to know about. And so here's where this software that we use takes how often something appears and then makes it bigger. I'm sure you've seen these now, they're pretty common, and or seen them before, I should say. And so the #1 thing that was mentioned in this open-ended question was the issues with the forms and them being problematic and hard to understand and things like that. And also the business with the libraries came up, and librarians. And so basically here, this was on the professional survey. We have libraries in every county. That's where we conducted our focus groups. And so we had a lot of participation with the librarians, but there was a sentiment on the side with the legal professionals that the libraries are there. It's not that they're an untapped resource, because you already have people going there using the computers and getting information there, but they felt like it's a infrastructure that exists that's relatively low cost that might be able to be more widely utilized in some way to help with some of the issues here and trying to serve the demand and taking a little pressure off the system. So I found that really interesting because it wasn't something I was expecting. So it was kind of an exciting part of the study for me to learn this. But with the legal forms, it's really an issue of people not knowing what forms to fill out and just feeling overwhelmed by them and thinking that they need a lawyer to help them because they are not confident that they can do it themselves. The other question asked them if there were any emerging issues, which was things that they might be seeing that we didn't ask about that maybe they hadn't seen in the past. And one of the really big thing that came out was there were a lot of issues with children in school and guardianship and people being able to get the information they need and records and things like that. The other issue that came up was serving clients with substance abuse and mental health issues. So I do a lot of work in the behavioral health field, and we know that those clients often have cognitive problems and sequencing problems. And so even just being able to show up for a legal appointment with the right pieces of paper can really be a challenge. And I'm going to guess maybe some of you have experienced that. So working with that population and the challenges that they face seemed to be something that was on many people's minds, that it came out this prominently. And then again, we see the transportation. Here, human trafficking came up, and that was, we did not have a question about that. And people living in rural isolation came up. And then there are the forms again. So that always comes up. Okay, so now we're going to switch to the case management data. And here we were tasked with looking at the case management data over 3 years and conducting a trend analysis. So we show it to you all combined here. So over the 3-year period that we looked at was 2017 to 2019. And before I launch into this, I'll just reiterate, I said it at the beginning, we had data from 6 different organizations, and that proved to be a little bit of a challenge because not everyone collects data in exactly the same way. And even when they do kind of collect it in the same way, it may not come out of the systems in the same way. So we totally appreciate everyone that gave us the data. That was wonderful because we got all the data that we asked for. But the next task then was to take the data from the 6 organizations. So it was Legal Aid, Equal Justice Wyoming, the Children's Law Center, the Coalition Against Domestic Violence, the Medical Legal Partnership, and Teton Access to Justice. And then we harmonized that data and got it all into one data file. And so then once we did that, that way we were able to look across everyone with a case management system and then say, what are the most common cases, and then drill down after that. So what I'm showing you now is at the high level across all 3 years. And so again, no great surprise, family law was we had the largest number of cases in that category, and it came to 7,701 cases over the 3-year period. Consumer finance was the next one. There were 2,250 consumer finance cases. And that's followed by 1,446 housing cases. Then there's a miscellaneous category that has almost 1,000 in it that when we get to the drill down, you'll get to see what those were. And then that's followed by individual rights, 712. And then these are the 5 that I'll be showing you in the presentation today at the drill down level. Okay, so on the family data across the 3 years, the #1 types of cases were custody and visitation. So this now is where the surveys tell us about needs people had from the clients. This is telling us about the met needs that the clients received. And so there was custody and visitation cases. There were 3,402 of those. 2,684 divorce, separation, or annulment cases. 319 cases that involved support. 313 cases that involved domestic abuse, followed by guardianship and conservatorship, 279, and then these smaller ones. Again, this is across the 3-year period, so they're pretty small numbers if you think about it on an annual basis. On the consumer finance, the #1 type of case served were collection cases, and then that's followed by bankruptcy cases, and then contract cases that involve contracts and warranties. And these numbers are really small over a 3-year period. And then on the housing, so here's that landlord-tenant issues. I mean, when you think that these are going across 3 years, this is huge compared to all of the rest. There were 1,076 cases that involved landlord and tenant issues. So on the individual rights, this was interesting. Mental health came up as the big number, 505. And so the next one after that is, it says they're unknown. There are probably quite a few expungements in here, but we did not get the exact number, so we weren't able to disentangle them. We did get the 19 of them from Equal Justice Wyoming that we were able to pull out here and create a category for. So in the case management system, there isn't a separate category just for expungements, which probably would be a good thing when they give the new version of the case management system. If they do that, that'll probably be helpful for the data, or looking at the data rather. And then on the miscellaneous cases, there were 515 cases that involved wills in estate, 218 that involved tribal law cases, and 115 advance directives and a power of attorney cases. And then again, across the 3 years, these others are pretty small. So on the trend analysis, we just look at that to see if things change over time at all. And for the most part, there's a little bit of drop down in the family law cases from 2017 to 2018, but then it levels off. But if you look at all of these lines, it really doesn't matter which one you're looking at. It seems to be a pretty stable number from year to year of cases. So this one has on it that miscellaneous category, the individual rights, housing, consumer finance, and then of course at the top is the family. And then this one here, and then just note these numbers, it looks like this is a lot more, but it's only 250 here, whereas in the last graph, the y-axis went up to 3,000. So I just want to point that out. But so these are the bottom 5. And but at the top of that list were the juvenile cases, and then income maintenance cases, employment, health, and finally education cases. Really small numbers down there. So now we get into the nuts and bolts of what a needs assessment is supposed to do for you. So we know all about the cases and the clients and what they say they need and how things are dispersed on the social indicators. So now we're going to look a little bit at capacity. So here we have, this would be considered your met demand and the capacity of your current system in providing services. So we have the number of services provided by year by each organization that provides services. So Legal Aid of Wyoming is on the top. And then we have Equal Justice Wyoming next, the Medical Legal Partnership next, Teton Access to Justice Center, the Wyoming Coalition Against Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault, the Children's Law Center, Wyoming Free Legal Answers, the Volunteer Reference Attorney, and the University Law Clinic. And so the one thing I want to point out is the only one that really notably goes down a lot relative to where it starts out is Equal Justice Wyoming. So we have these asterisks here, and in the report it defines it. Basically, this dropped off a little bit when the Free Legal Answers and the Reference Attorney program started up. So I just wanted to explain that. And here I want to also explain, we just weren't able to get data for 2017 from the coalition.
Your message to Sandy Mellon says what they say they need and how things are dispersed on the social indicators.
So much for putting your phone on do not disturb, right? Siri decided to start talking to me about social indicators. Okay, so again, this is the capacity and the met demand for the whole state from, I believe we have everything here. So if there was anything missing, I would love it if you could let me know. And I'm sure Ray and Angie and Walter would want to know that too. Okay, so here, this is a little busy, and normally you wouldn't put up a busy table like this in a presentation, but I wanted to do this so that I could show you on the services provided how it broke out by all of counties in Wyoming. And so I think the number one thing that's fantastic is every county has been served every year. And so for people who care about that, that's really good news. So when you are sitting down with the report and doing planning, which I'm very excited about because I understand that's how it's going to be used, that last capacity table that we looked at and this county table, you'd want to, these would be your planning tools. You'd want to have these things out to look at. And now here, when I first went over that poverty data with you at the very beginning in that rank ordered graph, I had said that we'd see it again, the poverty data. So here you see it geographically. So what we've done here is we put up the graph that has the poverty data shown by county, so you can see how it's spread out. And again, the darker shades indicate greater levels of poverty. And then the stars indicate where services are and the number of services. And then I put a little legend on the side here. So for instance, in Albany County, there are 3 types of services. It's the UW Law Clinic, the Children's Law Center, and the Domestic Violence Coalition. And so this is another planning tool. So you kind of want to have all these things out at once as you're having your discussion so you can answer the questions that you're going to have and that are going to come up when you're planning. And so, and it also gives you the opportunity to look at where the services are relative to need, because if you could only have one thing to look at for need, poverty would be the perfect thing to look at in this case. And you can see how many services there are based on the level of need. Okay, so one more busy table and then we're all done, I promise. So this one here has all your counties down on the left. It has the number of eligible individuals at 200% poverty. So in Wyoming, there's 150,523 people who are at 200% below. The next set of columns starts off with households that are below poverty. So what we did here was we wanted to come up for planning purposes with estimates of need and estimates of not just need, but also demand for services. So we used the Legal Services Corporation's Justice Gap report to help us figure this out. So there's no prevalence rate of exactly what the need is in Wyoming. So the Justice Gap report was a national study of unmet needs. So we used the findings from that study and then applied it to US Census data to try to come up and give us an idea of how many people need services. So they were very thorough in that report, and they had calculated need for people with 1 problem, 2 problems, or 6 or more. And then they also had come up with a number that says, of all the people who need services, what % would actually come knocking on your door and demand services? So in this column here, and this is at the household level. So when you're doing stuff like this, you have to kind of live with the level that the information is available at. And I had contemplated converting it back to individuals, but the average household size is around 2.5 people per household, but that includes children. So a household could have 2 adults and 2 children. It could have 1 adult and 5 children, or it could have 4 adult roommates living together. So this is at the household level. So I just want to make sure everyone keeps that in mind. But basically what this is telling us is that for each column where it says eligible households, it tells you how many households are eligible and then the number of households of those who are eligible that would actually ask for services. And so in this, people with 1 legal problem who live in an eligible household, 71% of them have a legal problem, and then 20% of those would demand services. So in Albany County, you could expect 558 people, for instance. And then it drops down to 54% when there's 2 legal problems, and then it drops down to 24% when there's 6 or more. but you could imagine the intensity of what the case would be if they have 6 legal problems at once. So that's what this one does. And this is, again, another planning tool. You'd want to have these last few, the slides that I've showed you would be the ones you'd want to look at for planning. So I know I'm out of time. I just want to get to the key findings. So the family law issues were the most common. Librarians are an excellent resource. Forms and instructions in navigating the court system repeatedly mentioned as needing simplification, better instruction, and more help for pro se clients. The legal professionals, we had some people say they'd like training in immigration issues and disability claims and appeals. So I thought I'd point that out so it didn't get lost in all of the data. And that the client problems are many and complex with few resources to solve them. And a lot of people reported that they feel like this has even gotten worse over the years, and that it's also more pronounced for clients with mental health or general behavioral health issues. And then finally, the pandemic broke out during the needs assessment, and you saw some of the data that we had that reflected that. And then anecdotally, legal aid said that they've received increased contacts for landlord-tenant questions, wills and power of attorney, and domestic restraining orders. So that's everything I have for you. Thank you for your attention and your time. I really do appreciate it. And if you have any questions for me about the presentation, or if you look at the report and have questions, I have my contact information there. I'd be happy to answer them. And I believe we have some time left over for questions and answers.
Yeah, thank you, Allison. And I'll just open it up to questions now. Most people are muted, so you may need to unmute yourself to ask a question.
This is Justice Boomgarden, and I'm curious whether there are any restrictions in sharing this report or any guidelines that Legal Aid or Equal Justice Wyoming would have for all of the many stakeholders that are on this call for sharing the report.
That's a great question. I probably should let one of my clients answer that one.
So, this is Angie, and I don't think we have any restrictions on sharing it. I mean, certainly what our next steps will be sharing this information with others who are stakeholders, other funders, members of the legislature, and then using it also as a planning tool as we allocate resources. So I think certainly it's fine to share that, unless I'll let Ray speak to that as well, I guess.
Thank you, Angie. This is Ray Machia from Legal Aid of Wyoming. We want it spread far and wide. We want everybody to know what our needs are, and everybody. We tried to design this so that everybody can use it. Anybody who's looking for a grant, all the other legal aid organizations out there, we want them to be able to use it. Please freely use this to try and get grants from federal, state, and local levels everywhere we can to get more help. What I really think this shows is the pressing need. No matter how many resources we have, it seems like we have a lot, and still there are so many people that are not getting help. So anything we can do to help, that's what the whole purpose of this grant or this needs assessment was, is to identify those needs and get those resources out there. So please disseminate far and wide.
And Angie, this is Walter. Could I jump in for just a second?
Absolutely.
Well, I agree 100% with what you said and what Ray just said. From the very beginning, we've designed this to be a tool that could be used publicly. And I think, although the report is voluminous and contains a lot of really important detailed information, we've made it a real effort to keep it public in nature. There's no confidential information contained in the report itself or the appendices, and so I agree 100% that this ought to be considered a public document for use around the state.
This is John Eidelman with the Legal Services Corporation, and first of all, I'd like to congratulate you all for a great job. This is something we've been asking you to do, and you did it for us. And certainly we're going to use it. We're going to put it up on our webpage, and we're going to share it with all our other recipient programs as an excellent example of what they should look at when they go forward. because we ask all our programs to do needs assessment on a periodic basis, 3 years, 5 years. So once again, thank you and congratulations.
Yeah, thank you.
Justice Boomgarden, this is Sharon Wilkinson. Allison, I'm the executive director of the Wyoming State Bar. I just want to thank Allison and her team for such great work. Angie, I can visit with you about this, but if you would like me to, I can certainly I obviously can't publish the entire report, but I would be happy to publish the executive summary in the October Wyoming Lawyer. I think it's really great information, just even for all of our Wyoming practitioners to have. And obviously the magazine goes, more widespread than just Wyoming. But I'm happy to publish that in the October Wyoming Lawyer, and then we could even, I could put that on the bar's put the full report and the executive summary on the bar's website, and anything else you'd like me to do. I'm happy to put a broadcast email out to the membership if that's helpful. So anything the bar can do to assist and get this out, I'm happy to do that.
We certainly appreciate that. Thank you so much, Sharon.
Well, I just want to thank you all for being so enthusiastic, because there's nothing better than doing all this work and have people want to use it.
This is Donna Sheen. I also wonder if we could use it to maybe have all of the legal aid organizations now meet, and we can talk a little bit about how we can use this data to better coordinate services as well. So I think this would be an awesome opportunity to do a better job trying to work among us to really prioritize the most important cases and get more people served.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Donna. And again, I think this is just, the starting point, and from here, I think this is just going to be a really good report that has given us some good information that we can start making those decisions and prioritizing things going forward and helping to coordinate between the different programs. So, I appreciate all the different legal aid programs being willing to help and share data and provide feedback for this. Did we have any other questions?
Angie, this is Walter again. I wonder, Allison, from your perspective, being an expert in this kind of work, how would you recommend that we as a group talk about the impact of COVID-19 on the findings that you've reached here? I know you've addressed it both in your presentation today and in the written report, but given the unprecedented circumstances that we're under right now, I mean, what is your advice to anybody who is in this group that is discussing this needs assessment with others? How do we talk about the impact of COVID? Do you have any concerns about the findings that you've reached because of COVID? Any comments on that topic?
Sure. Well, first of all, anywhere we could, we updated the data if there was new information. So like what I showed you on that Feeding America slide where they had done the special projections. But I think probably the most relevant for all of you is, was slightly anecdotal, but Ray was able to tell us that they had already had more calls for different types of cases. And I think just in the news, I mean, even last night, there's a lot of the evictions starting up and things like that. So I think the number one thing that you might expect is more pressure on the system. So even though we have all of these numbers, and even in the trend analysis where, things were relatively stable across the 3 years that we looked at, it wouldn't shock me if you saw a spike in the data for some of the things where we know COVID's going to affect with, especially where it concerns economically disadvantaged people, affecting their ability to pay their rent, and then getting into issues with landlords and things like that, and the potential for domestic violence cases and other things like that. So I think that, like I said, everywhere we could, we updated it. We know in some of those tables, like that last one was at 125% poverty, and you serve up to 200%. So you also know the numbers are conservative in some cases. And the one thing I didn't mention about that household data at the very end, when I said there could be more than one person in a household, one of the things that it was news to me that I learned doing this needs assessment was that if one person in a household contacts a type of legal aid service, if the other person needs legal help, they have to go somewhere else. I believe that was true. So when you see those numbers, you know, they're conservative, that even at the household level, you could have two people looking for service. So maybe they end up representing themselves, one of them, and one of them getting legal aid. But there's a lot of pressure on the system from all of that. And I think COVID only makes it worse in some of those categories that we saw. The debt category is another one that's probably going to escalate. So I hope that answers your question, but that's pretty much what I see, is that to expect a little more pressure on the system in those key areas where we know COVID's having an impact.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right, I'll just give everybody one last chance if you have any questions. All right, well, hearing no further questions, again, thank you so much, Allison, for sharing this with us today and for doing this report. Again, I know this has been a huge undertaking. We've been working with you for over a year.
Yes, well, thank you guys for all the support you gave while we worked on it. It was really wonderful working with such interested clients and meeting with you on a regular basis. So it just made it better for us.
Wonderful. So again, just to kind of wrap up, the next steps will really be using this as the stepping stone to making, you know, decisions in the future. I know we'll be working with the Access to Justice Commission to try to identify ways that we can address any of these unmet needs and be creative in how we can, you know, assist more people. And then also Equal Justice Wyoming and the Equal Justice Wyoming Foundation, as funders, will be using this in trying to make decisions about allocating resources around the state and making grant funding decisions. And then we'll also be sharing this with other stakeholders so that people can understand just the great unmet legal need that we have out there. And I also just want to take a minute to thank Justice Boomgarden. She and the Access to Justice Commission were also behind helping to coordinate and get all of the different legal aid providers on board to help and assist with this. So just to close out, I'll actually just turn it over to Justice Boomgarden to wrap up. So thank you, Justice Boomgarden.
Well, Angie, you're quite welcome. I can't take any sort of personal credit at all. I think the one thing we really have going for us in Wyoming is a strong commitment and a commitment in particular to collaboration. So this was a team effort in every sense of that phrase. And I too would like to thank DataCorp. I'd like to thank Equal Justice Wyoming and its foundation, Legal Aid of Wyoming, and all of the civil legal service providers who sponsored and assisted with this. And I'd really like to thank everybody who's participated on this call today. I think looks like we've got good participation by a number of different groups and stakeholders. So thank you all very much. The report, I think, confirmed what a lot of us knew or you know, anticipated it would show. For me, it was enlightening in some areas, with particular with respect to emerging issues or trend lines. I think it's a sobering report that sort of reaffirms what we all know is the obstacle that poverty presents to access to our justice system in this state, and it's a broader issue than just this state. But and then, as has already been discussed, on top of that sobering report, we have the increased demands that are going to come with the impacts of the COVID pandemic, and also I think our state budget woes. So it can feel a little bit overwhelming, but I think we, the stakeholders that are on this call, are dedicated and committed. And I think that you would all agree that even though with COVID and the budget woes, every day some anchor of our legal services institution comes loose. And it's been said we've got to decide whether for every anchor that comes loose in these uncertain times, we're going to either reattach it or reinvent it. And I think everybody on this phone or on this meeting, hopefully sort of shares my sense that we can't give up hope. I mean, we're committed, we can't be morbid about it. So we just have to see these things as opportunities, as Angie mentioned, to get creative and to use this data to move forward. And on behalf of the court and the Access to Justice Commission, we are fully committed, as was sort of best outlined in our 2020 report, to support Equal Justice Wyoming. And we're looking forward to our next step in meeting in early November. And for all those on the Access to Justice Commission, my judicial assistant, Lynette, will send out this little survey to make sure we've got a majority that can meet on November 2nd. But I think some of the obvious things that Access to Justice Commission can work on are maybe some of the fee waiver issues that were raised. And also, as courts move forward into more automated case management, I think we'll become a better source for data to make this needs assessment a living document that we can continue to update. So again, appreciate everybody's participation, and thank you on behalf of the court. And I think we've got a lot of opportunity in front of us. So let's move forward. We've been waiting a long time for this information. Now we've got it, and there's a lot of good that can be done with it. So thank you.
Thank you, Justice Baumgarten. Well, and thank you for everybody who joined us today. We did record this, so if anybody would like a link to the recording, please just email me and let me know, and I'd be happy to share it with you. Okay. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.